Okay, hi everybody. Now, I'm not exactly sure where you're at, so I'm going to start at quite a low level and just tell me if you know it all, and we'll move on quite quickly. Natasha's here to help me as well because she's been studying in the past and has decided to have a little bit of a break. Okay, and I've done an MEd, and the literature review in a master's degree in education is very different from the other master's degrees I've done, and I'll try and cover that today. Okay. One thing that's a bit strange about your task is it's a literature review on its own, and I'm going to explain why that's going to be quite hard for you, okay, in a moment. So what am I going to go through today? Let's have a quick look. Tell me if you think this is the right thing, okay? I'm going to look at a research question, because usually you need your research question in order to do your literature review. I'm going to cover finding literature, including using illegal websites I shouldn't be recording this, to find cheap books or free books for you. Okay, it's going to save you a few £1,000s. I'm going to encourage you to use groups where it's available. Natasha and I both use Facebook groups and things like that you can find out about. I'm going to show you how to collate your resources, my way of doing it, and it might be something that you like. I'm going to talk a little bit about the function of the literature review, and then a little bit about the stages of writing it, and I'm going to end a bit with the shape, okay? Does that sound like the sort of thing you want to cover? Okay, so I looked at your booklet today for the first time, and I'm just trying to make sure that what I say is in accordance with it. Pretty standard thing in literature review, but there will be differences according to different institutions, okay? So please stop me at any time if you have any questions, okay? So the first thing is you've got to understand what the literature review is for, and it is to place your work in the context of what's been written before, okay? So I'll illustrate that with my own work in a moment, okay? Depending on the course, you may need to shed light on gaps in knowledge, okay? That is usually PhD, but if you're doing a master's by research, they also like it if you've identified a gap in knowledge that you're going to study and try and fill. So it might be something that's been written about before, but it might be something within a Middle Eastern context, for instance, that you might want to cover, okay? And this is a really important one for me, is to identify and resolve conflicts, okay? So if I quickly tell you about my own research, and then you'll see what I mean by this. A number of years ago, we had a staff CPD. We all got together, and I listened really carefully, and everybody said the same thing. Kids in desk are nice, they lack independence. And that's when I first twigged. So I came about with a problem, and that's how research begins, isn't it, okay? And the problem for me was we've identified that the students are not very independent in desk, but are we addressing it? Or is our curriculum itself creating it? In other words, is there space for students to be independent? Are we teaching and fostering independence in the curriculum? If not, do we have a contradiction or a problem? And that is the origin of my research, okay? So you may think, why am I telling you about that? Because you're going to see that usually the literature review has to fit in with your problem or the reason. There has to be a reason for your research, okay? And the literature review as well, I think this is an important one, stops you needlessly duplicating work that's already been done before, okay? So you have to show an awareness of the field. Now, a typical thesis structure is an abstract that says what it's going to be about, an introductory chapter, which is about the context and the problem, and the review of literature comes next. So that is basically what's been written about this before, and it becomes before your own research. Your research is going to build on that literature review where you map the field. Does everyone get that? Any questions about that? Is it all good? Okay. So, the research question then is what drives the research, and the literature review shows what's been written about this area in the past. My research question, which I'm playing with and you're going to change all of the time, is does project-based learning extend the agency of teachers in a British curriculum school in the Arabian Gulf, okay? So in my literature review, I'm going to have to look at project-based learning. I'm also going to have to look at what agency is, you know, when it's about freedom, it's about choices. I'm going to have to cover a little bit about the British curriculum, and I'm also going to have to write a little bit about the Arabian Gulf and the Middle East, okay? So in your research, usually you don't name the school. And if you write about the UAE, you're in great danger unless you anonymize it and don't make the school too identifiable. You do realize that, yeah? So this will be, if you want me to do another section, I had a hell of a time with ethics. I can help you with that. Ethics are really hard here because people go to jail for saying the wrong thing. So that's something to bear in mind.
That comes under the research methods, so that's the next one after.
It's worth thinking about that and what you're going to write about things, etc. Particularly when you're writing about the context of the school, etc. You've got to be very sensitive about what you write, okay? Okay, so where are you going to get your information from for your literature review? Well, the first place is going to be your library. Now, usually if you search through your library, you can get through all the paywalls, because I'm sure you're paying a lot of money to the University of Buckinghamshire, and they in turn will subscribe to lots and lots of journals, yeah? Is that what you found, Natasha?
Yeah.
Going through your library is the best thing?
Yeah, it was the same with me, but actually when it came down to it, I probably didn't use that as much as what I used for other legitimate.
I really recommend that you get in touch with your librarian wherever you're from. So I study in Melbourne in Australia, and so I'm really far away, but the librarian is just incredible. She actually finds stuff for me and all kinds of stuff like that. So do your library course. That should be part of your induction. Really learn how to use the library. Learn how to use Boolean operators. Do you know what they are? I can do another session a different time for you about that. That's how to search smart, so that you're using commands like and or, etc. So Omar, another time I'll cover that maybe, yeah? If you want.
I would also say just in on that is don't be afraid to ask your tutors for that either. So for example, I would always go back to mine and say, look, I don't know where to start with it though. And like Peter was saying, the librarians, I do at university, but are still incredible with it. And actually I was scared of them thinking, what they're going to think, she doesn't know where to start. But you'll find actually they narrow it down for you so much that it's so easy to use.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Then you can also work through Google Scholar. Have you all used Google Scholar before? So you know how it works. Then it has the abstract and everything like that. The only problem you're going to find is that there are a lot of paywalls, okay? And that's why sometimes you'll need to find the title in Google Scholar and then take that title and author and put it into your library, okay? Like I say, nearly always your libraries will have access to all of the major journals. Taylor and Francis is very big for education, for instance. You've probably seen that one, haven't you? Now that will be through the Athens one, I believe, which is one password. So your library will have an Athens password. It will have an EBSCO password. These are the really big journals, okay? So you'll have access to them at any time, okay? Now, one of the things that I teach EPQ students quite useful is that you can look at this particular, I'll send this PowerPoint to you. You can look at Scopus metrics, okay? Because journals are classified Scopus 1, 2, and 3, or not classified. Scopus 1 are the ones that have the highest currency, are seen as the best, okay? So the best journals in the world, I'm afraid, are almost always American, and the top 7 in education are all American. There they are, the Review of Educational Research, etc. However, on your booklet, page 21, this one, I noticed today, they mention some ones that they want you to look at, okay? So one of the things to do, guys, is that you will decide what your literature review is going to be about, and then the particular journal will specialize in things. Like I'm interested in project-based learning, okay? I'm interested in critical pedagogy as well. You know, the idea of students being able to talk back to the curriculum, etc. So there are specific journals that I look at all the time that I know are going to be good for me, and you'll find out which ones are good for you, okay? Another thing is, and Natasha, I think you can say something about this in a moment, is I would look for groups that are really good. So I'm interested in project-based learning. School 21 in the UK is an amazing school. It's all project-based, okay? I also belong to the Buck Institute for Project-Based Learning Work. There are independent agencies and corporations, etc., but also lots of Facebook groups. Go onto Facebook and do a search for the area that you're interested in. You know what I mean? If it's like Brechtian theatre or whatever it is, there will be a group, okay? And it's kind of funny because you'll meet some really nerdy people who can really help you a lot, you know? I can't recommend it enough, yeah? Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, so also along with those, obviously, with your focus, I would say even, I know like I did it as soon as I became a teacher and doing the GCSE and things I did the M-Teach, but I still use it now. I'm a doctorate. I still use that Facebook group to connect with people. And actually, I think it's called M-Teach Me on Facebook. It isn't assigned to a specific university, but on there I found that really useful in terms of shared practice, and especially when it came down to my lit review, resources that people were happy to send, I used probably throughout. So I would say the M-Teach Me one definitely. It's the same as, the same as the M-Ed, it's just the M-Teach just carries different credits, but it's the exact same course, it's still be able to use that information.
I think, building a community of practice and building like people who help you is the way to get through long distance learning. Long distance learning is really lonely. It's really good you're doing it as a group. I get really lonely. My degree's in Australia. I don't have anyone else to work with. Natasha and I and another guy, Mohammed, have been meeting a little bit. I really recommend that you do that. Otherwise, you won't get through it because it is really hard, isn't it? You need resilience, don't you? ResearchGate. Are you all members of it? Go home and join it tonight. It's absolutely amazing, okay, because it will really help you. So if you go onto ResearchGate, it's like Facebook for geeky, nerdy, academic types, okay? They'll have all of their publications there. You can then write to them, say, hi, I'm Omar, I'm doing this. Can I have access to this article, please? And I'll send it to you. Almost always, 90% of the time. Because, Omar, their metrics go up, and like everything now. So you want to be cited as an academic, so they want to help you. And if you follow them, then you can see who they're following, and you can do like backwards citation style mapping. You look at who they're following, and then that will take you to someone else, etc. And that snowball citation thing, which is an important technique to use in the literature review. Okay, Omar, I hope I don't get in trouble for this. You can't do it now, guys, but when you go home, this is magic, okay?
It's changed my life.
Yeah. Yes.
It's blocked at school, isn't it?
Yes, it is totally blocked at school, and it does move around a little bit, guys. If it gets blocked on one site, just type which library Genesis is working or whatever, okay? Thanks to Russia and their very lax copyright laws, there are so many academic books, and some of the books that I have are like books that would cost me, I do buy the odd book, but they'll be about £120, for really high-tech ones on project-based learning and stuff, because not many people buy those books, so they punish you so much. So have a look at Library Genesis. If you need some help, we'll have to do it outside of school, okay? Okay, now, so I spoke about the literature review mapping the field. I just want to talk a little bit about that. I had a nice picture of a map on here before. I don't know what happened to it. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Genesis, is that just for books?
It's just for books. Yes. You wouldn't get.
Them?
You wouldn't. Yes. So you download them. So I'd show you how to do it now. So let's imagine you're looking for a book on, say, Vygotsky, an educational theorist. You type in Vygotsky. You're going to get about 250. Okay. And then just like Pirate Bay, a torrent, it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. And if one torrent doesn't work, just go on to another. Yeah. And I've never got viruses or anything like that from it, so it's all okay, yeah? And you don't get like Ukrainian girls popping up either, so it's better than Pirate Bay, okay? And there's another one that I'll send to you as well that I found recently, okay? So this idea of mapping the field, one of the things they want to see is that you're like an apprentice scholar. Before you can write about the field yourself, you've got to map it and learn it, yeah? And then you're going to build on it. So this is what the literature review is there for, okay? So a couple of other things about the purpose of the literature review. I think, like I said before, this is the really interesting bit where in your literature review, when you do a review of the literature, sometimes you kind of see, don't you, Natasha, you think, this hasn't been written about before. This other thing has been written about before, and my thing's quite close, but it's a little bit different, okay? So for me, at first, I wanted to write about project-based learning. I'm head of EPQ. I wanted to write about the students, yeah? But what my lecturer and supervisor showed me about, that's been written about loads. Not many people have talked about the affordances, how it's good for teachers, okay? So I looked at it and I thought, I'm getting a lot of literature that shows so many teachers are so sick and tired of downloading the same standardized PowerPoint and not having a feeling of creativity. So it was my hypothesis that one of the things that might please teachers about the EPQ is there is no standardized lesson that's possible. you have to have a creative, reactive approach based on the students coming to you. So I found the gap in the literature that way. So does everyone understand? You go to the literature, you read about what is there, and you think, how can I make my small little contribution to knowledge? Yeah, that's how the literature review works in that way. Okay. Now, in terms of the research steps, usually you'd start with Google Scholar or with your library. And then I think the most important thing is this idea of snowballing. Have any of you tried that? Okay, you can actually, you know the school subscribes to JSTOR? And do you know what the password is and stuff, you know? So in JSTOR, you can actually do a citation search. So you can take an article and you can put all the citations into it and it will spit up things, okay? So if I read Omar Murtaz's work, for instance, and I think, damn, this is good. Obviously, I go to his citations and I'm looking at who Omar's quoting, okay? And this is how the snowballing works, okay? Now, this might surprise you, but on the EPQ, I always make the students start with Wikipedia. It's really, really good, okay? Do you believe me? Yeah, so if you look at, say, if you looked at an educational psychologist like Vygotsky, there are about 200 references on Wikipedia. So even if the Wikipedia article isn't that good, you can check the references though. So some of your sources are already found. Likewise, if you find a brilliant article by somebody, for me it was a guy called Blumenfeld, who is an expert on project-based learning. He was my base person that I went back to all the time. And from that, I learned all of the other theorists, yeah? So it's a fantastic technique that you need to learn. You can also look at dissertations that other people have written, okay? And I'm just in the process of getting Gregory Anderson to give us his master's. He's just finishing. But he's very proud and he wants it to be perfect before he gives it to you. Okay, so the steps that I would recommend that you do. First of all is logging. It's getting all the stuff together. Then it's going to be categorizing, and then it's going to be like outlining what it's going to look like. So I very much recommend paper pile. Do you guys have a citation piece of software that you have to use or not? Okay, so EndNote is the most popular one. I am too thick. It's quite techy, EndNote. So I have gone for the one that is so easy that even I know how to use it, okay? It's called Paper Pile. This is what it looks like. So shall I quickly demonstrate to you what it looks like? Right, I'm going to go on my Google Scholar, yeah? And, Boolean operators, I'll show you that while you're at it. If you put and in capitals, then it will make the search contain both things. So my search now will contain Vygotsky and project-based learning, okay? So I've got one here, all right? Look, I've used it in paper pile before. Let me find one I haven't used, okay? So I've got this one here, Vygotsky's zone of proximal development and problem-based learning. Problem-based learning is very similar to project-based learning. Problem-based learning comes out of medicine, is the difference. So I think to myself, this looks really good. I want to use it. Do you see I have a little tab there? I press paper pile, and then, like magic, hey presto, probably won't work now. You know how whenever you say you're going to show someone something, it should appear in a moment. Of course, it's not doing that now. Let me go back. Is it there now? It just wanted to make me look stupid, didn't it? There it is, okay? And you can add a PDF in there, and then if you want to actually cite it, I would simply go to citation, and PaperPile will also allow you to set your citation style. So I'm with, as I told you, I'm with Melbourne, so I'm Melbourne Harvard, okay? I've set the style, and immediately I can put that into my work, okay? Now the other good thing is, do you see along the side? I'm basically putting them into folders, and this is going to help you with the next part of your categorization of the literature review. So the first thing is you've logged them all. Now you're going to start to theme them and decide what are the different things, okay? So if I quickly go to this slide here, that might explain something to you, okay? As I'm reading about project-based learning for me, what I start to work out is common themes that run through the literature, okay? And as I do that, it's a bit like tags. Do any of you use tags in Gmail? You can use tags in PaperPower. You can tag your essays, and you can say, this essay is good for showing that project-based learning is really good for self-regulation, or it's good for showing that project-based learning is good for collaboration. So you start to theme your work together. Now, the advantage of that is when you write the literature review, then your paragraphs are based around themes. Is that okay? Is there any questions about that? All making sense? Can you guys see the value of paper power?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
I know some of us are doing the bridging one before, and we've got to do the evaluative critical thing.
Yeah.
Would you do the same thing where you do sort of these themes with that?
I think so. It's a very common thing, and it's a good question that you ask them, because when you present your findings, you're also going to have to theme them as well. So say you've done your study and you're looking for these different things, they call it nodes, okay? It basically means groups of things that you can find together. So for me, I thought I'd put a few things in there for you to see, okay? The good things I put in purple. Project-based learning is great for autonomy. It's great for authenticity. Real tasks that apply to life as opposed to schoolwork that kids can't see the value of, yeah? Expansive assessment, so you're judging character, you're judging resilience and everything. Bad things of project-based learning, Omar, behavior management, really a big issue that often comes up, like if you're just leaving people to do projects, if you're in the wrong sort of school, God help you, yeah? Cognitive load theory, which you know about as well, like students get overwhelmed quite often, okay? So do you see the value of doing this before you start the literature reviews? Then you can see your themes that are going to come through, okay? Kind of making sense? Cool. All right, so I showed you I have my little folders there, and that helps me because it allows me to categorize and everything. Did you do something similar?
So I use EndNote, but only because my university stated how to use EndNote, and then they basically, I was looking that they exported it over afterwards, so we sort of collated there. But I would say that PaperPower is probably easier to navigate than EndNote. EndNote, if you are interested, let me know, but I have the app, so even now it basically compiles even my own reflective learning through it, but I would say that PaperPower is easy to navigate at this point.
My lecturers are really annoyed that I use PaperPower because EndNote has more functions to it, okay? So if you're a techie person, do your EndNote. If you're like me, if you're a thick sort of artsy person who has to run down to the help desk all the time, PaperPower. Literally, it's like, click, there it is, yeah.
I think EndNote as well, you can like voice record through it as well. So
Yeah.
like I could download, for example, a journal and I'll voice record at the time what I'm thinking about it, and it will also play it. But again, I don't know, with an EndNote I didn't, but for example, in the doctorate you have this, you can sort of citate voice notes as well. So EndNote allows that if it's something that you want to do. Just let me know.
I think voice notes are amazing as well, and you could use them for your literature review, because I always had this thing, I don't know if you guys find this, you read a really difficult essay and then you start taking notes on the side, you lose your thread. But if you've got your phone and you just say, I've just read this bit on page 23, it's really good, and you've got immediate notes, you can also put them into software that converts them to writing as well, If you guys know anything about Otter, OTTER, it's very good. Really good software, okay? But even just on the iPhone, I haven't used it. Have any of you used the voice recognition on the iPhone? Because that's what my lecturers do for me in Australia. When they read my stuff, they actually talk to me, and then I get a transcript of what they've said. And it's quite accurate, usually. So that might be something that's useful for you. Okay, so this is the thing about the literature review, though, is you have to have a goal in mind. Otherwise, it just becomes a kind of list. So you remember how I had a goal? I looked at the school, I thought, actually, we really lack independence in terms of our students, yeah? And how can we address this, So in the literature review, I had a kind of goal in mind, a standpoint. I noticed in your booklet, it talks a lot about positionality as well, which is something for you to think about, okay? Positionality has become very, very sort of buzzwordy, and it's like, who are you as a researcher? Are you a white male who's in a foreign country looking at things from a particular point of view? So they do like you to actually declare your own interest. And, in a sense that will highlight your positionality. Don't know how you guys feel about that. I think that that's a good thing. You know, if I'm writing about Arabic culture, I think it's better that I admit I'm not fluent in Arabic. You know, I'm not a Muslim. I'm coming from this position as a cultural outsider, etc. So that's a big thing that I noticed in your booklet. And maybe for another time we talk about that.
Would you do that throughout then? Just keep making reference?
It depends where it goes, actually. I probably wouldn't put it that much into the lit review, Omar. I'd probably put it into the context bit, the introduction. Do you know what I mean? So when I look at my research, for instance, I say I'm a white Anglo-Saxon male, I'm coming from this kind of point of view. But I also say stuff, Omar, like I've taught around the world, I've taught IB. So I'm coming with a knowledge a lot of British people lack. So I'm declaring my positionality in that kind of way. Do you know what I mean? What do you find, Natasha? Do you think it's a useful idea?
Yeah, no, I do. I think at the same time pay attention to your ethics a bit around it. But I definitely think it's a good thing with it, and I know that tutors like to see that. I personally haven't made reference in that detail, but I have said that I'm newer to teaching X, Y, and Z with it. And I think it's important that it also builds that profile of you through that lit review.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's important for whoever's reading it to be able to see. Yeah, that you've looked at it from a certain perspective, because, for example, me and Peter did the same thing. Like, we'll talk about a certain piece of writing and we'll have completely different views on it, and I think it's important for that they can see that as well.
Sure. And I think in my case, guys, I'm writing about project-based learning, the EPQ. You know, it's in my interest to say it's amazing, isn't it? You know, so I declare that kind of positionality of what is my interest in the research, okay?
So does that sense of bias come through?
Yes, it does, yeah, because this is another thing that you'll deal with is what's your critical lens? What's your view on the status of research? I don't believe in neutrality and objectivity. I dismiss it immediately, which is why I'm not a quantitative person. I actually believe that there is no getting away from bias. And so that's my critical lens immediately is, yeah, I'm biased, but so is everybody. Do you know what I mean? But then that's why they want you to declare your positionality and also to look at the other view. So in my EPQ thing, I've deliberately chosen some people, Natasha knows this, who've had total failures in the EPQ. Because I'm going to try and look at, you know, where the problems are as well, okay? So do you get this idea that your literature review is not therefore just going to be, I'm going to give you a whole list of things on this particular area. It has to be themed and it has to tell a story, okay? Now that's quite complicated, isn't it? In your book, it recommends that you do this critical review document. Man, that's going to take you a long time if you do that for everything. So I'm going to leave it up to you. I might suggest you do what I suggest to people who do an EPQ. Let's imagine you read 25 things. Maybe do that 4 times of the absolute key text. Otherwise, this is going to take you a huge amount of time, okay? But you need to think about how you're going to record your reading, don't you? Are you going to have some kind of table? How are you going to identify your themes? How are you going to see how the literature intersects or conflicts? Okay? So that's what your university are telling you to do. So after you've got all of your themes and stuff like that, you do what's called outlining. And this is the shape of the literature review, what it's going to look like, okay? Now the 2 main things that people use are, is it going to be chronological? Or is it going to be thematic, or is it going to be a combination of the 2? Now this is where it gets hard, so please stop me and ask me, really, okay? So shall I illustrate what I did, and then that might give you an idea for what you might want to do later, okay? So for me, for project-based learning, I began with the definitions, because like with everything, nobody bloody agrees on what project-based learning is. So the first thing I do is, hey, the literature shows no one really agrees on what project-based learning is. I think the best definition is going to be this, okay? Then I went to the father, the founding father, the daddy of project-based learning, who's John Dewey, okay? So I tell a little bit of a story of how it evolved. And then I look at some of the key features, and I wrote in terms of themes, okay? Now in the literature review, don't forget that you should show other sides as well. So Omar, I know you like the cognitive load theory, yeah? The sweat, the swelter and all those guys. So I use them, in my literature review to say, they point out this, and I'll sit down and talk to you why I think they're wrong sometime, okay? But I say, actually, these guys answer them. So what you're doing is you're showing the debate in the field. Does everyone get that? And you are kind of coming to what your conclusion's going to be, okay? So this is how it all started off. This is what the research shows. This is the argument. And then you're going to come to a kind of end of the story point, okay? It's got to have some end point, some destination. Do you get me? So that's why it's not just a cataloging and summary, it's also an evaluation. Is that what you found?
Yeah.
So it looks something like this, guys. You tend to go, this is something that I talked about in my reading, okay? So I started with the big area, which is I'm a constructivist. I think students have to learn creatively. I think the teacher talking to them, they don't learn anything, okay? Or very little, all right? So I started with the big area. I believe in active learning and constructivism, okay? Then I went to the smaller area, project-based learning, and then I go to my area, extended project. So you get that funneling kind of idea, yeah? So from the general to the specific, okay? Here's another little triangle thing, okay? So again, you might do the initial mapping and then analyze some of the background sources, set the context, and then evaluate and review. This is the key bit that your supervisors will be looking for, is that as you read the literature, you're thinking about which items of the literature to you are the most compelling, the strongest, the most evidence-based, or whatever it is. Okay, is that all good? Okay. And then what I've done in my last slide here is I just took some of the sources from your book, okay? I've watched one of the videos and it was absolutely excellent, okay? So just to sum up, the literature review's got a lot of different stages, okay? I hope I've showed you that. You're going to do your reading and your logging, and then you're going to try and find some kind of shape by theming and categorizing. And then you're going to have to do the hardest thing, which is to outline the structure of the literature review. And what I wanted to really emphasize there is that that has to be in some kind of story where you come to a conclusion, okay? Almost like a little bit of an argument or a narrative, okay? Shall I stop the recording and take some questions, or is that all right?